Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Argos Anonymous. My name is Adam, and this is your home for ongoing, up-to-date Argent Saga content, so don't forget to like and subscribe if that's the kind of thing you're into. Today we've got a little treat for you. It's a deck. We're gonna just, here's the deck list for those of you who don't want to hear anything else. There it is, boom, you can print it off, take it home, and play with it. But this is a Hoenna Luna discard hand manipulation deck that has actually proven to be pretty fun and pretty effective. So, in your own play with your friends and whatever you've got at your local meta, you might have to tailor it a little bit. So at the end of this, we're just going to talk about possible substitutions and ways to switch it up depending on what you're playing against. But it's really fun to play this, I think. And it can hold its own against a lot of stuff. It's gonna struggle with hardcore Liam aggro. Like if someone's just coming at you and trying for like a turn 3 kill, you're gonna have to try to survive long enough to drain them of their hand and drain them of threats. But we do have some possible solutions to fight that. Other than that, though, this deck this deck has some teeth. So just sit back and crack open a Coke or something and just enjoy this. If you have any questions about it at the end, feel free to ask. If you like deck techs, just stay tuned. Or if you have any requests for certain kind of decks, put it in the comments. Let me know. We can get some decks on here to kind of help you guys. I'll give you a framework from which you can then customize it to your own liking. So let's just kick it off. What do we have here? Well, we've got Hoenna, the Immoral Conjurer, because we're going to be building up a lot of tokens and we're going to use a Golem package here. And then, of course, Luna, the discard spirit. So Luna is going to be charging up I'm going to assume her ability over the course of play in this deck. And then the ability is you can force your opponent to discard cards. So that fits very well with the theme of this deck. Now, some people have asked when I played, why don't I use, because I have a lot of ruined abilities in this deck, which you're going to see. People have said, well, why don't you use the new champion from Hokken, Evaerie? The reason, I guess, primarily is because Hoenna gives me access to some Hoenna specific cards, like Hoenna's Wrath and Dalen, the Raven and stuff. And it synergizes with the golems that I'm using to be able to just blink out new golems. And it gives it a little bit more teeth aggressively because I can produce units from Hoenna. And because I'm killing so many units with Brawler and Target Attack, I'm charging Hoenna up pretty well. But Evaerie is good because you can you can kill small units. Her thing is you put ruined units underneath her into the discard zone and you can kill a unit that costs 3 or less. Or failing that, you can at least make it lose its abilities. I found that just using Hoenna with Hoenna's Wrath and being able to clear their whole board was just mildly better in this deck than using Evaerie. But there are so many ruined units in this deck, units with ruined abilities. Try it. Try it with Evaerie. If you like it, go for it. The other question I got was, why use Luna instead of Serpio? The reason is, although I have a lot of units with ruined abilities and being able to kill them myself might be helpful, they don't ever seem to stick on the board. Like, they seem to be killing themselves off just fine. For example, when I Wrath and I board wipe myself, I'm triggering all these ruined abilities anyway. So I didn't find Serpio to be providing a whole lot of advantage for me, whereas Luna is building counters and feeding the deck archetype by forcing the opponent to discard when I want them to discard. So that is why I am Hoenna Luna. Moving on, but play with it. See what you like, and if you want to go Evaerie Serpio or Hoenna Serpio, then do that. That's cool too. In fact, against Liam or aggro, Serpio might be good because you can Soul Burst and give everything minus 1,000, keep yourself alive a little bit longer. But I don't know. I think overall this is a Hoenna Luna deck until proven otherwise. For my towers, I tend to just go for this deck with the standard towers, unless you'd like to put, so we have like water, we have light, we've got darkness, definitely, because then you're forcing your opponent to discard, which fits with everything that you're doing. And then you have air as well. You could put embers if you want to put embers in your sideboard. Fire, when Tower of Fire gets cracked, you get to destroy a unit, which is nice. But embers, even though you don't get to just destroy a unit straight out, you get to deal damage to 2 things, and it has higher defense. So if you find yourself struggling against aggro, which in this deck, that's your main concern, maybe switch fire for embers. So you could put this in your sideboard, and if you find your opponent playing like Liam aggro, then you can sideboard in embers and maybe stay alive a little bit longer. I chose the Tower of Darkness over the Tower of Surging Shadows. Even though this 2000 defense is really nice, I chose Darkness because it fits the theme of seeing your opponent's hand and discarding a card, which is nice. You do have a lot of targets though. So again, if you're playing against aggro, you might switch Darkness for Surging Shadows because it has a higher defense and because then you get to recur a 3-cost unit or less from your discard. And because they're, it'll probably come in handy because your opponent's going to be ahead of you in towers destroyed if they're playing aggro. So you'll trigger Surging Shadows ability, and maybe you get to bring something back, and it'll keep you alive longer. So you might start with the standard towers, and then sideboard these guys to help keep you alive against a really aggressive aggro deck. So there's your tower medley. Moving on, for shards in this, I just went with Corona Shard, so that I can have the utility if I have to of just destroying a unit. I do have 3 of the Nightmare Crystals in here. I don't find myself using them very often, but you could. It could be handy to fill your discard if they don't have a Bone Scavenger. And then just 6 basic full art shards. Flart shards. And okay, so the different packages in this deck. Let's start with Hoenna. So we have like a Golem package. We're going to do 2 failed Golems. These guys, when they die, so they have a ruined ability. We're going to see a lot of ruined abilities in this deck. So your 2 failed Golems, when they die, you get to search your deck for a Golem and put it in your discard zone. What you're searching for typically is you have 1 each of these. You've got a Golem of Allurement and a Golem of Avarice. Your Allurement, when it comes into play, you get to take control of target unit with cost 1 or less. And when Avarice comes into play, you get to discard a card from your opponent's hand. So why are you putting these in your discard? Well, the reason you want them in your discard is because then, when you need to, you can grab them with, I guess that's over here, you can grab them with Yami. So in this deck, we're going to have two Omega Magic Yamis, and I put 1 in the sideboard actually, just in because I'm still kind of playing with it. But you can search your whole deck for these guys, and you put them in your discard. And then if you have a Yami in your hand, you can play this at instant speed, and you can trigger the ability whenever you want it. Like if you hit the light tower and they produce a Guardian, then you can Yami out your Allurement and take control of that Guardian, and then hit for game or whatever. Or if they only have 1 card in their hand, after they, like say they have no cards in hand, they begin their turn, they draw a card, and then after the draw, before the charge phase, you could like Yami and Avarice into play and force them to discard a card. So there's some evil shenanigans with that, and that is why we have just 1 of each of these. I don't go overboard on these because this is not a Golem deck, right? This is just a Hoenna package within a discard deck. Then we're going to have 3 Golem of Devourments. These are the guys that have Guardian, and when they die, they replace themselves. So Golem of Devourment keeps you alive. The whole point is turn 2, you play 1 of these, and then when he's destroyed, he replaces himself. And when he's destroyed, he replaces himself. So we're going to have 3 of those. They're awesome. Moving up in the world, we're going to have a Hoenna Horrific Perfection. This is a really, really powerful super rare. Secret rare. It's 4 cost, 3,500 power, Omega unit. So Omega units, you have to play this on top of another Golem unit, and that's why we have a lot of Golems, and also why we're playing Hoenna, right? Because she's going to build counters throughout the course of play, and then you can remove 3 counters to produce a Golem unit, and then you can Omega this on top. So this is a lot of different things. Number 1, it gives us a sacrifice outlet, so we can kill one of our own things to trigger a ruined ability. Number 2, it lets you draw a card and your opponent discards a card, right? So you can feed the whole discard theme of this deck by forcing the discard while triggering your own ruined abilities. So it's like a double win, triple win really, because you get to draw. Also, you can offer to destroy units or augments. It gives you removal. And if you're destroying a token, you don't even have to use the offering mechanic. Right? Offering is where you exile cards from your discard. So if you want to offer 2, you have to exile 2 cards from your discard in order to trigger that ability. But if it's a token, it doesn't cost you anything. So you hit the light tower and they have like a 0 cost token, you can offer 0 and just kill it. So this is a really, really powerful card in this deck. We're going to play 3 Hoenna's Wrath, and what you're going to notice is, so this basically wipes the board of anything that's not a golem, which is really nice. Turn 4, you're really hoping to have one of these in your hands so you can just wipe the board. But in this deck, you have a lot of non-golems, but almost all of them have ruined abilities. So you can feel good about wiping the board and your golems will stick and all your other stuff will die, but it doesn't matter because they have ruined abilities and it's like trigger, 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 trigger. So it's going to be fun. Then we do have a Dalen, the Conjurer's Raven. So Dalen is great because when it comes into play, you can put 3 counters on Hoenna, or you can remove the counters from Hoenna and you can tutor your main deck for anything that costs that much or less. So you could like play this and then you could sacrifice it with Hoenna, or you could wipe it with a Wrath or whatever you want to do, and then you could Yami it back into play and then search. Or if you already have counters on your Hoenna, you can search. And you'll find there's reasons you want to search. In fact, we'll just leave that out so we can demonstrate what you're searching for when we move on to the next little package, the next little cassette of spells that we're going to talk about, and units and whatnot. So I have chosen to put a Mech package in this deck, and it's working really well for it. So what do I mean by Mech package? Well, Argent Saga, you have some like sci-fi technology elements, which is really cool. So the Mech package is the Shard Mechas. So Shard Mecha Shiru is a 1-cost 500 power Guardian with a Ruin ability that lets you search for a Shard Mecha Buki. So these are going to help you stay alive in the early game because you're going to play this, and if you can sacrifice it to like your, you can wipe it with a Wrath and it doesn't matter because it replaces itself. Or you can sacrifice it to the Horrific Perfection and it doesn't matter. You trigger its ruined ability and it helps you stay alive, right? So then when he dies, he's going to search for a Shard Mecha Buki. Buki is a 2-cost 1000 power with target attack, right? And he gets plus 500 whenever he attacks a unit or is blocked, right? He also has a Ruin ability, so you can sacrifice him to the Horrific Perfection, or you can wipe it with a Wrath, it doesn't matter. Plus, he has target attack. So your goal in this deck is to play him, and you're not really trying to crack towers with him early game. You're trying to clear the opponent's board. So here you're keeping yourself alive, and here you're trying to throw him into one of your opponent's unit, kill the unit, and generate counters on Luna and Hoenna, right? And then it doesn't even matter if he dies. Like if you throw him against something and he dies, fine, because it triggers the Ruined ability, right? So you're trying to generate tokens for your hero or your champion and your spirit, and you're trying to clear your opponent's board. That's the whole point. These guys, when they die, they're going to search for Shard Mecha Tsubasa, 3-cost 1500 power, same thing. Tsubasa has Brawler, so the turn he comes into play, you can attack a unit. You're trying to throw him against your opponent's units to clear their board and to generate tokens for your Luna and your Hoenna. So you got 2 of those. Also, all of these can be searched with Dalen. So if you find yourself not being able to pull these little 1-cost guys, and you only have 1 token on Hoenna, no problem. You play a Dalen, dump the token, and you search for this, and then you can start the whole chain of mechs, which is really cool. Also, these are Yami targets. So you can play an Omega Magic Yami. Where'd I put that? You can play a Yami, a 2-cost little Yami, and you can bring this immediately into play, and then you can brawl or something and put a token on your champions. You can clear your opponent's board, and then you get to trigger the Ruined even if he dies, which is really nice. And then when he dies, of course, you go for the big guns. You're going to pull this Mega Shard Mech Titan Yugo. Yugo is a super beast, right? He's 4,000 power, he's a mech, and by the time you get this guy out, these guys are usually filling your graveyard because they're your sacrificial lambs of clearing your opponent's board, or maybe you've wiped it with your own Wrath, or you've sacrificed them to your Horrific Perfection. When Yugo is in your hand, you can just exile these things. You can exile 1 of each from your discard to play him for free, so he doesn't actually cost 8. He hits the board, and then you can, once per turn, discard a card and just destroy target unit or augment. So in this deck, because you're you're tutoring for things and you're drawing extra cards, which you'll see later. You can not always, but you can pretty consistently get Yugo out turn 3 or turn 4, and then your opponent basically they have to deal with it. They can't just ignore Yugo. They've got to deal with it, which is nice because while they're distracted by all your mechs, what you're actually doing is you're just ripping cards out of their hand and you're neutering them for the rest of the game. So, moving on to the actual deck. Oh man, we're going to have some fun. Okay, so in this deck, you're going to have 3 of these Evaerie or however it's pronounced rogues. This is a 1-cost 500 power unit that when it's ruined, it just goes back to your hand. So you can sacrifice this to your horrific perfection and it just goes back to your hand. You can wipe it with a wrath, it just goes back to your hand. You can play these and scout your opponent's towers with them, and then even though they're exhausted and easy to kill, if he actually attacks it, it doesn't matter. They just go back to your hand. So we'll have 3 of these rogues. And then we're going to have 3 of the Enforcer of the Twisting Abyss. This is a really powerful card if you can manage to pull off an attack. So the reason these are in here is there's a lot of reasons. The first is it's a 3-cost 2,000 power. Whenever it deals damage to an opponent's tower, your opponent discards a card and you draw a card. So wow. I mean so if this guy hits your opponent's tower, he's going to break it. Right? Because he's 2,000 power. And then your opponent immediately loses a card from their hand and you get to draw a card. So it's huge utility. But in addition to that, this guy's a 3-cost. So he's a Yami target. You can Yami him back into play like at the end of your opponent's turn and then have him ready to swipe on the beginning of your next turn. But also, whenever your opponent discards a card, you can add this card from your discard zone back to your hand. Right? So you can wipe this guy with a wrath, and it doesn't matter because you're just going to bring him back into your hand as soon as your opponent discards a card, which they're going to be doing all the time because that's what this deck does. You can sacrifice this to your horrific perfection and just bring it back to your hand. And then you'll see there's other utility for that too. Next, we're going to have Mob, the Evaerie Dowager. This is an outstanding card. It's a 4-cost 2,500 power from Echoes of Hokken, the latest set. So this one, when it arrives, you can either bring back target dark unit from your discard back into your hand, or you can have your opponent discard a card. So when you play this, if your opponent discards a card, you can now bring all of these back into your hand, or you can bring back, you've got a ton of stuff with, or a ton of dark units in here that you might want to bring back in your hand, fine. So we have 2 of those. Also, then when she dies, your opponent discards another card. So she basically arrives, your opponent discards, and then she dies and your opponent's discard, which means if you sacrifice her to one of your things, you're triggering a discard. Or if you wipe it with a wrath, it doesn't really matter because you're also getting a card out of it from your opponent's hand. Next, we have Melanite, the Evaerie Night Queen. Fantastic card in this deck. Whenever your first ruined ability triggers each turn, it triggers twice. So this deck is full of ruined abilities that are going to trigger, and she'll let you double trigger them, which is outstanding. Also, at the end of your turn, you can sacrifice a unit, and if you do, put target unit with ruined from your discard zone right into play. So you can sacrifice this guy at the end of your turn, right? And then you can bring Mob into play. As soon as she comes into play, your opponent discards a card, and when your opponent discards a card, this guy comes right back to your hand. Or you can sacrifice an Evaerie Rogue, and it doesn't matter because it goes right back into your hand, and then you bring a Mob back into play. You could bring any of the mechs, the shard mech is back into play. It is an outstanding 4-drop, and if your opponent can't remove it immediately, they are going to suffer, and they're going to suffer greatly because of it. Next, we have a Gloom Necrolord. This guy's a 9-cost, but you're never going to play him, right? So, at least not from your hand. So the Gloom Necrolord, the way he's going to work is you're going to either discard him with, you're basically going to discard him with a spell, and we'll go into the spell package later. His ruined ability is you can expel this card from your discard zone, and if you do, put 2 target units, or just 2 target units from your discard zone into play. So again, when he dies, you can just put 2 things from your discard directly into play, which is crazy, right? So we'll get into, I guess, how we're gonna cheat him into play. We'll get into that next. So that's your units. So let's get into spells, right? We've talked about the Golem package with Hoenna, which helps you what? It helps you survive, and it helps you wrath, and it helps you manipulate your opponent's effects by making them discard a card or stealing their units. And now we've talked about this discard engine with Mob and with Melanite, the Night Queen. We've talked about the Hoenna, the Horrific Perfection, making them discard, and the Enforcer, Twisting Abyss, making them discard, right? We haven't fully explained Gloom Necrolord yet, but we're about to get into it. So your spell package is this. I have one Melanite's Gaze. This is a great first turn move. If you have this in your hand on turn one, maybe you just play it, and then you get to see your opponent's hand, and you'll get to discard one of their cards, because this lets you look at your opponent's hand and you can choose. This is from Hokken, the latest set. You can choose a non-unit card from among them with cost 2 or less and make them discard. So if you do this near the beginning of the game, you're always going to hit something, and then you know what's coming and you get to force them to discard. So that's a wonderful first turn hit. We've got 2 treats. So treat is a 1-cost instant spell that, as an additional cost to play this card, you sacrifice a unit, and then you search your deck for a number of cards equal to the sacrifice unit's cost and send them to your discard zone. So I like to use this. Number one, you can trigger your own ruined abilities, and this deck is full of ruined abilities, right? So you trigger your own ruined abilities, but the best way to use this is in response to your opponent trying to kill one of your things, right? So your opponent wastes a spell, or maybe they'll Corona Shard your Horrific Perfection, right? And then in response, you'll treat it. So that way you force them to waste something, and then you get your utility anyway. So I usually never proactively treat. I don't just like play a unit and then treat it. I wait. And the opponent will attack one of my guys, waste an attack, and then I'll be like, and I'll just treat it. When I do treat, what am I dumping into my discard zone? I'm going to put him in my discard. I'm going to search my deck for the Necrolord. I'm going to dump him, or I'm going to put some of these in my discard. I'll search, because as soon as the opponent discards a card, which they're going to do from Luna or from something else, these will come back into my hand. So I'll dump Necrolord in there, I'll dump these in there, or I'll dump Yami targets, right? Like anything 3 cost or less, like a Dalen or the Golem of Avarice, Golem of Allurement, I'll put those in my discard so that I have access to them for the rest of the game. So Treat is our next spell. Then we have 2 Ruined Reclamation. These are excellent super rare cards from the 4th booster set, Echoes of Hokken. So as an additional cost to play this card, you can sacrifice a unit. So who are we going to sacrifice? Well, we're going to sacrifice any of our mechs because they have ruined effects that will trigger. We're going to sacrifice the rogue because it just comes back to our hand. Maybe we'll sack a mob to make them discard a card. We're going to sack a Twisting Abyss because he'll just come back to our hand when the opponent discards anyway. And then you can trigger a ruined ability from target unit you control, or you can add target unit with ruin from your discard zone to your hand. So you could like trigger a mob to make them discard a card and then add a mob back to your hand. Or you can trigger one of the mechs and then you can add a mech back to your hand and then play the brawler one. You can start to build more counters. There's so many shenanigans from these ruined reclamations. They're really, really fun cards to play with in this deck. Then we have Cruel Accord. This is this is a really underestimated common card from the first booster set, Betrayal. Cruel Accord lets you discard 1 card from your hand, and then your opponent discards 2 cards from their hand. So you can discard this guy from your hand, and here's what's going to happen. So you're going to discard this guy from your hand, and then when your opponent discards 2 cards from their hand, he just comes right back to your hand, because whenever your opponent discards a card, he triggers, and you can just add this card from your discard zone to your hand. So you discard him, your opponent discards, and he just comes right back. Or you can discard one of your shard mechas, right? Because whenever your shard mechas are dying, they're searching for other shard mechas and they're filling up your hand. But you need one of each in your discard to play Yugo. So you just discard a shard mecha and then it feeds your Yugo cast. Or whatever you want, really. Since you can bring things back with Ruined Reclamation anyway, you're just discarding cards and you're forcing your opponent to discard 2 cards, which is really going to frustrate them since basically you get everything back. Then we have two, which we already talked about, two Omega Magic Yamis, just for all the utility we already mentioned. And that's it. It's really fun. What you're going to find is that the shard mechas with their target attack and their brawler and your ability to keep bringing them out and bringing them out and bringing them out, you're going to build counters. But Hoenna, because of her golems and her producing units, it's going to let you crack towers. Like, she's got teeth. So you're wiping your opponent's board, you're cracking towers, you're clearing the board with your target attack and your brawler. So you're definitely putting tokens on these. What I like to do then is I like to, once I get their hand pretty much empty with like Cruel Accord and Twisting Abyss and Mob and stuff like that, and I like to save my Horrific Perfection discard ability for immediately after they draw for a turn, so they have nothing on the board, or they have few things on the board, and then they have no cards in their hand, and then right after the draw but before the charge phase, I'll burn the card out of their hand with Horrific Perfection, and they just sit there with no cards. And then what can they do? They do nothing. They draw a shard and then they pass turn, and then you're doing your shenanigans and you've got mob, ready or whatever, and then the moment that they draw, you treat your mob, trigger the ruined ability, or you sacrifice a unit and you just have them discard. You're just having them discard for days. And it's fun, guys. So if you want a fun deck to try out that's gonna frustrate your opponent and provide like a new kind of play, that I haven't seen too many people use this kind of deck. So it's fun. It's fun. I recommend this deck. If you have any questions about it, put it in the comments. Let me know. If you try it out and you customize it, like some people I think would find these to be useful, you could put Evaerie Throne Guards in here. He's a one. This is from Echoes of Hokken. It's a 1-cost, 1,000 power guardian. It can't attack, but it's a guardian, right? So it'll help you stay alive, and target unit loses all abilities. This will help you against Liam because take a Golden Roseblade, for example, make something unblockable. So you can trigger this ruined ability to remove that ability from the unit that's coming after you. You can trigger it with, if this guy dies, sure, but you can also trigger it with Ruin Reclamation, or you can treat this whenever you need to, and you can trigger that to remove the abilities from something. Similarly, Evaerie Glamour is a really nice defensive spell, or offensive, I suppose, because you can turn target unit. It's an instant 2-cost spell. You can turn target unit basically into a 1,000 power nothing, right? So you could turn a Yugo, a 4,000 power thing that like destroys everything, into a 1,000 power nothing. Now it only lasts a turn, but sometimes one turn's all it takes. If he's attacking you with something, especially, you can turn it into a nothing, and then just block it or kill it. It's really fun. So this is a great sideboard card, I think, or depending on your local meta, maybe you'll main deck it. And then this is great too, to at least consider those things. And then maybe a third Yami, if you want to. Cruel Accord is really a really great spell too. I thought about putting 3 in here, but I don't want it to clog my deck. Like, I always want one, and maybe I could deal with getting, I'd never want to start the game with 2, probably I would like mulligan it, but I could draw another one within the first 2 turns and it wouldn't kill me. But if I ever got stuck with 3 early game, it would really be a wrench in my machine. So there you go. Enjoy that. Enjoy Echoes of Hokken. Really fun set. It opens up so much variety and potential. Let's see what else. We're gonna come up with a Liam Solar Knights 2.0, and then I'm still refining Beast and Elemental decks and dinosaurs and all these other things, but I'll get them up here eventually and try to share that with you dudes. All right, Argos out.